Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Korla Pandit, or known as the godfather of exotica, he had his own TV show that ran in the 1950s and had an impressive recording career as well. He was rich, married to a white woman, and accepted in Hollywood as, well, an acceptable exotic. The only thing was, Korla wasn't what he seemed. Why was Korla Pandit the greatest imposter of the 50s? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. One of the icons of exotica, Pandit embodies the complexities of the genre in more than one way. Pandit came to fame in the early 1950s when he appeared on a 15-minute show, Adventures in Music, on television station KTLA in Los Angeles. While he played some piece of exotica like Jalousie on the Wurlitzer, his face, topped by a white turban and oval jewel, looked like Orphan Annie's Indian helper, filled the screen, surrounded by a gauzy haze. His soulful gaze is said to have drawn housewives into rapturous fantasies. Fantasizing about being somewhere else isn't a new concept, and as Americans moved into suburbs that took boredom and conformity to new heights, daydreaming about distant locales became a commodity. Indeed, the suburbanizing 1950s featured a wave of music glamorizing distant destinations in Asia and Oceania. Dubbed exotica, based off Martin Denny's album of the same name, the genre featured musical interpretations of these seemingly out-of-reach places. While Denny may have popularized the genre, known to the masses as Korla Pandit was known the godfather of exotica thanks to his television appearances. Sex sells, and it sells even better with a dash of mystery. For every housewife in mid-century America, the enigmatic charm of Indian performer Korla Pandit was the ticket to getting weak in the knees before the kids came home from school. In the 15 minutes allotted to the Korla Pandit program, the performer brought a scintillating new rhythm to suburbia's ho-hum beat. Every week he'd grace the small screen and play the sultry sounds of Mizzaloo with a coy smile, wearing a bejewelled turban and flashing those soul-searching bedroom eyes. It was all part of his shtick, of course, and one of the most strangest in Hollywood history, given that Pandit wasn't Indian but African-American. Today the persona he created opens up his race, fame, and surprisingly flexibility of truth. Pandit let his music do the talking, literally. On a Los Angeles-based television show known as Korla Pandit's Adventures in Music, wearing a signature turban with a hanging jewel, Pandit played the organ while dazzlingly staring into the camera. It was a forebearer of sorts to modern music videos. It doesn't sound very exotic now, but the mere presence of a man of Indian origin on the then new medium of television was very novel in the 50s. Not that Pandit was necessarily Indian, biographical details remain mysterious, although he said he was born in New Delhi. Although he performed some original music, much of his repertoire was in fact exoticized renditions of standards. In that respect, he was very much in the heart of the exotica tradition, which did not seek to present authentic world music as much as it did to dress up mainstream pop with mild world music influences, so as to be palatable to the middle American audience. Pandit recorded prolifically in his heyday, over a dozen albums for fantasy alone, and in the late 80s and 90s made something of a comeback as his music was discovered by a younger generation. Interviewed for the Incredibly Strange Music Volume 2 book, he has also given some live performances and had a cameo as himself in the Ed Wood film. According to the story Pandit told for most of his career, his father sent him to England and later the United States to be educated, and he eventually ended up as a student at the University of Chicago. He claimed to have taught himself the electric organ, then just beginning to become available commercially, in 3 days to qualify for a job as organist with a Chicago radio station, and went on to hold jobs with other local stations. Like most everything in Hollywood, it was all smoke and mirrors. His charade wasn't his stage name, it was his race. Korla Pandit, born John Roland Red, was a light-skinned black man from St. Louis, Missouri. It was a secret he kept until the day he died. In order to garner the kind of success which would have been inaccessible had he simply played himself, in 1939 he became Juan Rolando, a man of Mexican heritage, and in 1948 he became Korla Pandit, a Brahmin Indian. So, how did he do it, dear viewers? How did a black man from Missouri become the godfather of exotica? One of 7 children, John Roland early on displayed a natural talent for the piano. The jazz organist, Sir Charles Thompson, lived in Columbia at the same time and recalled that John Roland was considered the best piano player in town. His older brother, Ernest Red Jr., went on to lead one of the dance bands known as Territory Bands that played the black circuit in Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. The Red family moved to Hannibal, Missouri before John Roland was a year old, and by the time he was 2 his musical skills were evident. From 1931 the Red family lived in Columbia, Missouri. Shortly after high school in 1938 John Roland got his first job in radio with Central Broadcasting Company in Des Moines, Iowa. The next year Roland moved to Los Angeles where his sister Frances Red lived. That year Frances starred in the 1939 all-black cast film Midnight Shadow, where an outfit worn by Prince Alihabad, played by actor John Kreiner, inspired John Roland to wear his trademark turban and oval jewel ensemble. Somewhere around 1940 John Roland joined the large migration of blacks and whites from the Midwest to Southern California. He found work as a pianist and might have become well known under his own name as a jazz or R&B musician had it not been for his decision to bill himself as Juan Rolando at one appearance. Playing Latin tunes, which were quite the rage, Juan found it easier to line up subsequent gigs than John Roland had, and passing as a Mexican, he was able to join the whites-only local of the Musicians' Union. His reputation grew, and he moved from clubs to theatre appearances, and even landed a job playing on the Shandhu the Magician radio show. He also met and began living with a white woman, Beryl de Beeson, who worked as an animator at Disney. The couple got married in Tijuana, Mexico, on July 21, 1944, as mixed marriages were still not allowed in California at that time. They had 2 sons. Juan Rolando also aired on radio station KMPC and on Jubilee, an armed forces radio service show that specialized in playing black jazz and swing band music aimed at African American military personnel overseas during World War II. The Zoot Suit riots of 1945 climaxed a growing conflict between the white and Mexican populations in Los Angeles and may have had something to do with John Roland Red's decision to mutate again from Juan Rolando, Mexican, to Korla Pandit, Indian. Juan Rolando became Korla Pandit on June 28, 1948, on a radio show called Chandu the Magician. In February 1949, Korla Pandit's adventures in music debuted on television station KTLA in Los Angeles, where Pandit played the organ and piano, sometimes simultaneously. The handsome young man in the turban didn't speak, only gazed dreamily into the camera, an effect that proved mesmerizing as Pandit became an overnight sensation. In any case, by 1949 he could be heard on Hollywood Holiday, a radio show broadcast from a local restaurant. He and Beryl had also married after California's law against mixed marriages was struck down in 1948. Along with his new identity, when his jewel-topped turban, which Hollywood had already turned into an icon of its own kitschy fiction of Oriental culture, despite the fact that Sikhs, not Hindus, wear turbans, and even then without any ornamentation. The show was unlike anything seen before, not that that couldn't be said of many shows at the time. A bright, luminous light filled the screen, eventually fading to a shot of Pandit's hands on the keyboard as he played his original theme, Magnetic Theme. Pandit never spoke. Instead, viewers watched alternating shots of Pandit's face, Pandit at the organ, and Pandit's hands, with occasional shots of a company of exotic dancers. At times he played both organ and piano simultaneously, one hand on each keyboard. Much of the time the camera stayed on Pandit's face as he gazed soulfully into it. Born at a time when a black man in the South could get whipped for making eye contact with a white woman, Pandit was making dreamy eyes at thousands upon thousands of aproned homemakers stealing into their dens as they heated their fondue pots. Pandit quickly became one of the early celebrities of television. He and Beryl bought a house in the Hollywood Hills, and he could be seen partying with the likes of Errol Flynn. He had also adopted an English accent and a strange manner of speaking that always stayed at vague, apparently spiritual level. His nephew Ernest recalled that it got to a point he didn't even speak very good English because he had talked that Hinduism, or what you call it, for so long. By 1951 Pandit had a national audience, producing some of the world's first music videos known as telescriptions. Contractual problems followed that resulted in replacing Pandit with the up-and-coming pianist Liberace in 1953. Despite this, Pandit was so popular among San Francisco viewers that in 1957 a local poll found him the local personality most deserving of national recognition. Bay Area label Fantasy signed him to a contract, and he recorded an eye-watering 13 albums in just 3 years. By that time, however, Pandit had begun to break his silence on his shows and to speak about what he called the universal language of music. This hodgepodge of genuine and ersatz mysticism caught on with a small portion of the audience, that slice of California demographics that fostered its reputation as the land of fruits and nuts. But most viewers preferred their music philosophy-free, and by 1961 or so Pandit left the airwaves, at least as far as live performances were concerned. For most of the next 2 decades, Pandit focused on theatre appearances. He got distribution rights to his albums and was selling them at shows long after Fantasy stopped releasing them. Eventually the house in Hollywood Hills was traded for a tract house in Vancouver, Canada. His venues shrunk along with his audiences. Large theatres were replaced by retirement homes and pizza and pipes restaurants. Eventually he left his home with Beryl and became something of a drifter, moving from girlfriend to girlfriend, sometimes in his own place, sometimes crashing on a friend's couch for months. His polished and enigmatic style never changed, though, and eventually he was rediscovered by a new generation of fans with a resurgence of interest in lounge and exotica music. He appeared in the 1952 film Something to Live For, and again 25 years later in Richard Pryor's comedy Which Way Is Up. Director Tim Burton gave him his last movie role, as himself of course, in his 1994 movie Ed Wood. By playing off the cultural ignorance of the American people, of course, all John Roland Red had to do was slap on a turban and voila, instant Indian. He also invented a fantastic backstory and liked to talk about spirituality and peace. What's not to love? It really couldn't be too hard to fool us as people. We'll believe anything if it feeds into cultural stereotypes. The truth is, Red's whole act was one big stereotype, including the turban with the shiny gem he always wore. He claimed to be a Hindu, but Hindus don't even wear turbans. That's a Sikh custom. But why quibble with details, America? In the 1970s, Pandit, no longer on television, continued to record and perform for fans and play the organ at silent movie revival houses. Pandit last performed in Los Angeles in February 1997. He died in Petaluma, California on October 2, 1998. He was 77. Korla took his secret with him to his grave in 1998, and he is now celebrated posthumously as the first black entertainer to have his own TV show. Amazingly, over the show's 900 episodes he didn't speak a single word, yet captivated his daytime audience of housewives with his hypnotic gaze and his theatrical performances of popular tunes and East Indian compositions, played on the newly developed Hammond B3 organ. It really is a fascinating story, especially considering how bold Red was with his deceit. He wasn't going to quietly pass. He wanted a big life as a musician, and this ethnic farce was his way to get it, and apparently he played it out until the end. So, dear viewers, what do you think of Korla Pandit? Do you think black people knew his secret? If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Korla Pandit? He cemented his place in popular culture by playing whimsical instrumental renditions on his organ.